Hello, my name is Delynn Selig. I'm an FYS professor of the course Speaking of Sex, Gender Identity and Sexual Orientation in Global Perspective. I'm also a campus minister in the Spiritual Life Office. I'm here to tell you about the rubric that evaluates a category that is important to us in first-year seminar, multiple perspectives. When we talk about multiple perspectives, we're talking about a couple of phrases you may have heard, like seeing through the eyes of another person or walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. So we'll begin with a kind of middle-of-the-road paper. It's not the best paper ever written in the history of college, but it's definitely not the worst either. It's described like this on the rubric: recognizes one's own cultural traits and demonstrates adequate understanding of the complexity of elements important to the members of another culture in relation to its history and/or values and/or politics and/or communication styles and/or economy and/or beliefs and practices. Now, I'm going to have my student, Shirley, help me out by reading some excerpts of papers written by other students. Shirley, are you ready? Why, yes, Delynn, I sure am. Okay. This common event taught me that those in the presenter's culture are very different from my culture. For example, in my American culture, we see many people of different races and ethnicities instead of having only black and white like people in his. Second, we spend our money buying computers, phones, and devices instead of spending most of our time barely making enough to buy or scavenge food and shelter. Thank you, Shirley. This example recognizes some cultural traits without really articulating a thoughtful understanding. It also lumps all Americans into a somewhat privileged middle-class existence. Your professors are looking for evidence of critical thought and analysis on your part. In other words, don't just answer the question, what? Tell us, so what? Tell us why this is significant, what the implications are, and/or why people should care about it. Third, this culture's history has been mostly told through stories and songs from generation to generation instead of being written down in history books and studied. Fourth, we vote at safe, confidential polls to elect our leaders instead of having leaders appointed in processes that often include corruption, violence, or bribery. Fifth, interpersonal communication in the U.S. involves a lot of words and sometimes skirting the issue, whereas in his country, everything is just stated plainly and in your face. Sixth, our economy is built on many types of commerce instead of having only one product that makes the whole country suffer if anything goes wrong with it. Finally, our country is founded on religious freedom, whereas his has a state religion. Now, this is a simple comparison-contrast essay. It could just as meaningfully be comparing apples to oranges or cats to dogs. Again, help us see through the eyes of another person and catch a glimpse of that experience. The next paper is not a satisfactory one. The rubric states, shows minimal awareness of one's own cultural traits and demonstrates surface understanding of the complexity of elements important to members of another culture in relation to its history and/or values and/or politics and/or communication styles and/or economy and/or beliefs and practices. Now, take it away, Shirley. This common event taught me that everyone is exactly the same. Ooh. This introduction does not meet the criteria for a satisfactory paper. While it is good to recognize basic human commonalities, one of the goals of this course is to engage the differences between cultures and between people. From the beginning of time, everyone has pursued the same goals of being happy and rich. Every person all over the world wants to go to an Ivy League school, become a doctor, and drive a BMW. Now, these examples are not universal. While we can hypothesize that people all over the world basically want to be happy, goals of many cultural and religious backgrounds include kindness, generosity, and hospitality toward others. There is a reason that my political party is the best. Everyone wants to be there is a reason that my political party is the one everybody wants to be in, because it's the best one. And there's a reason that everybody believes in the same God and expresses that in the same way, because that's what good people do. Now, if I were grading this essay, I would begin to think that maybe this student slept through the entire presentation. Just like all people should learn English, ouch, all people should learn not to ever rely on anybody else. This statement is problematic because interdependency is key in many, many cultures. One example comes from the South African concept of Ubuntu, which I've heard translated as, I am because we are. People know that they cannot make it on their own, so they intentionally form communities in which all have their needs met. Even when huge problems arise, like dropping my iPhone into the pond at Jim Barnett Park. Now, we have a phrase in spiritual life that goes, #first-world-problems. That applies here. We just have to keep moving forward and believe that everything is going to be okay. As inspirational as this sentiment is, this essay would not earn its author an A. Now, the last sample that Shirley will share with you is an excellent paper. The rubric says, articulates a thoughtful understanding of the complexity of one's own cultural traits and those important to members of another culture in relation to its history and/or values and/or politics and/or communication styles and/or economy and/or beliefs and practices. Okay. I learned from this presentation that despite the commonalities of the human experience, the ways in which they are lived out can be very different from culture to culture, or even from person to person within the same culture. Now, this introduction meets the criteria because it demonstrates the understanding of complexity of cultural traits in our own culture and in the cultures of the persons telling the story. For example, although some in my culture would argue that we live in a post-racial society, we hear on the news of white police officers who assault people of color, especially Black or African American people, during a routine traffic stop. In the presenter's culture, racism is overt and systematized by laws that keep certain races ghettoized, poor, and abused. The example acknowledges the problem in American culture, the differences of opinions, and then compares them to the culture described by the presenter. In other words, it doesn't water down the message, but delves into comparison, contrast, plus explanations and descriptions. Help us to see through the eyes of the other person. Your professors want to see evidence that you put on the shoes of the people who are sharing their lives with you and walked a mile in them. If you have any questions, you can talk with your professors. It's going to be a great semester. Thank you, Shirley. You're welcome.